This is the For Freedom Podcast. This podcast exists to bring to light the legalism and abuse in the independent fundamental Baptist movement, and to encourage believers to grow in grace through the Scriptures. Now, here's your host, John Hollyfield.
John Hollyfield, and excited about the content we're going to be covering today. As we go through this history of the IFB, we are now getting into the part where I'm going to be discussing the life and ministry of the guy who becomes the leader of the movement for a couple of decades, and that is Jack Hyles. Before we get into that, though, just some things off the top. In the world of IFB news, you have in the structure of the Independent Fundamental Baptist, you had emerge about a decade ago what is considered the new IFB, and this is being led by a lunatic out in Arizona named Steven Anderson.
And all God's people said, Amen. Never!
No! What you see in the Hollywood movie is a lie. This is the truth. And when you come to church, you should expect to hear the truth about every subject. And tonight, you're going to hear the truth.
I'm going to pray that he dies and goes to hell.
I have no love. No love! Then get out of here. Get out of here. You're destroying America.
It doesn't work, stupid.
I'll stand up to him. Amen. Take me on. Huh? Come on. What are you going to do about it, you big bully? No! Because you know what? They are compromising, and they are tools of the media to brainwash you.
And Steven Anderson got quite a cult following on YouTube with his YouTube page just blowing up. How many of those people were actually listening to Steven Anderson and buying in what he said? And how many of those were actually listening to make fun of what he said? I don't know. I know some people keep up with Steven Anderson just to listen to the craziness. But he is somebody that maybe we will cover in an eventual episode. But the new IFB is not, it's not huge, and it's very extreme, very cultish, and very abusive. And it made the news. This is not this. Actually, I just found out about this, but this has been going on for almost a month now, but it hit the news that his sex scandal going on there at the church that he's tried to cover up. And so you can look into this and do some research on there. There's an investigation going on. I think there's an investigation, a formal investigation going on. His sons were talking about getting turned on by sexually abusing girls, and I think that they're out of high school, but I read some of the comments that they made, and I'm not going to mention them here on the podcast because they're awful. But this is something to look into. Basically, what happened though is he's lost a lot of people in his church over this because he first of all he covered up, tried to deal with it internally, and then is going to blaming the young girls and their families and that kind of stuff like that. So. That's what's going on with Steven Anderson. Another bit of news, not IFB news, but another thing that has just came out a couple of days ago was a faith healer and a rising star. Maybe rising isn't even the proper thing. He is a star in that faith healing world, is a guy by the name of Todd White. Now, if you haven't seen the documentary American Gospel, you need to watch it. It is fantastic. It's really good. It is now available on Netflix. If you don't have Netflix, you can go to Amazon Prime and rent it there. But you need to watch it. Now, in that, they do an examination, a little bit of Todd White's ministry. Todd White, this past Sunday, preached a message that I also encourage you to go find, look it up on YouTube, and listen to it, because what he says in that message is absolutely amazing. He really basically says that he has been preaching the wrong gospel. He quotes Charles Spurgeon. He quotes Ray Comfort and The Way of the Master, which I love their evangelism things that they do. And basically apologizes for the way he's been. I mean, it is what he says is like, wow, this is a God thing. This is awesome. Now, I really hope, and that is my desire, that Todd White has been converted. Todd White has come to biblical theology, and his ministry is now going to change. That is what I hope. I really do. And listen, this is not me saying this didn't happen to this guy. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is I have done, before I got into doing this stuff into the IFB, I'd done extensive research into the health, wealth, prosperity gospel and those guys. And if I were to say keep an eye out for things, I would say just keep an ear open, keep an eye out. Let's watch and see what happens. And I say that, listen, please, I say that with all the hope in the world that this guy really was converted, because this is nothing new in the health, wealth, prosperity movement. This, honestly, let me tell you what is the other possibility of what's going on here. The other possibility is that Todd White is taking a page out of Benny Hinn's handbook and doing damage control. Now, let's move away from Todd White for a second and go over to Benny Hinn. Anytime there was an examination done on Benny Hinn's ministry, you go and do the research. I think there was a Inside Edition episode done. ABC News covered him. Anytime there's something like that happens, Benny Hinn would then come out with some kind of big statement that he's repenting, that he's changing, and it never happened. You know, he's trying to save face and show his followers that what they exposed him for, the fraud that he was sorry, he was wrong, and he is now going to do proper ministry. But it never changed. The most recent thing was, I think, a year ago, he did this, and it made waves because of social media. And everybody said, Benny Hinn's repented, Benny Hinn's repented. And Benny Hinn said that he repented. He said that what he was doing was wrong. However, a month later, you find Benny Hinn asking for people to sow a seed of $1,000 or more. Benny Hinn never repented. He's doing damage control. Now, here's what could be going on with Todd White. This film, American Gospel, came out, and it actually came out, I think, a year or 2 years ago. I want to say 2 years ago. And I watched it pretty much when it first came out, but it hit Netflix. And when it hit Netflix, it really started to spread. Many people were watching it. In fact, not very long ago, within the last month, Todd White actually came out ridiculing the American Gospel documentary and calling it done by somebody maybe demon-possessed. Somewhere along the lines, he said that. What could be going on is that Todd White saw this, and Todd White has seen what's going on and is now actually trying to do some damage control. Now, I don't want to believe that that's the case, but I think we need to exercise discernment with what's going on. And I really do, and I encourage you to believe that this is a true repentance. But true repentance always follows action. How do you know somebody is truly repented? By not just what they say, but have they changed their behavior? If Todd White has fleeced people, and you have to understand what's going on, what Todd White used to do. He'd go out in public and specifically, knowingly, he knew what he was doing, deceive people with these leg lengthening routines that are parlor tricks, that are snake oil salesman tricks, that are from start to finish deceptive. That's what he would do. So this is what I would look for in true repentance from Todd White. Love what he said. Love what he said. But if he's fleeced people with his ministry, trying to gain money from them, I would look for him to then turn around and send the money back. Give money back. Now, that's not been a big part of his ministry. But I also would look for him to come out publicly and say that what he was doing there specifically, he needs to get specific. He has a public ministry. He did these things publicly. They were publicly exposed. And so therefore he needs to publicly repudiate his past actions. And I think those types of things follow true repentance. Biblical model. Zacchaeus in the Bible. Okay, so Zacchaeus was a thief. He robbed people using his position as a tax collector, and he took more and then pocketed it. When Jesus came and he was converted with Jesus, his repentance led him not just to stop stealing from people, but it led him to then repay them fourfold, more than what he had taken. That was an example of true repentance. And what you find in the New Testament method of people trying to change their actions is what's called the put off, put on principle. You don't just put off a sinful habit or a sinful action. You change by putting that off and putting on something better. The classic example is, when does a thief stop becoming a thief? Not when he stops stealing, but when he becomes a giver. Okay? So look for that in Todd White. Again, let me finalize that section by saying this. I hope, listen guys, I hope, I really do. I want to believe Todd White. What he said was great. Again, go listen to it. It was good. It was a good message. And so we'll see how that plays out. So now into the IFB history. We have covered IFB history. We've looked at the early fundamentalism, looked at the IFB forefather, J. Frank Norris. They consider him their forefather. Possibly that's true. His connection with John R. Rice, did an interview with Matthew Lyon on the life of John R. Rice. And in the last episode, I sort of talked about the 50s to the 70s and talked about the way the IFB expanded with different people like Lester Roloff in the girls' homes. You had Oliver B. Green on the radio. You had Lee Robertson with Tennessee Temple and Highland Park Baptist Church starting Southwide Baptist Fellowship meetings. And you had all of these things. Now, an interesting thing happens in the 80s. There's a paradigm shift in the 80s, okay? So a couple things happen. Let me break these down. First of all, in 1980, John R. Rice dies. And I really think that that's a catalyst in the IFB movement. John R. Rice dies in 1980. In 1981, Lee Robertson resigns his church. Now, Lee Robertson still has an influence in the IFB movement. He continues to travel around, help churches. But he resigns his church, and his church slowly begins to decline after that. 1983, Lester Roloff dies in a plane crash. So within 3 years, you have three big names, sort of. Lee Robertson, not as much, but the other two, their ministries are finished. Curtis Hudson was a pastor in Georgia who had grown a large church. He takes over the Sword of the Lord ministry in 80 after Rice dies. So John R. Rice dies. Curtis Hudson comes on the scene. He was already preaching conferences, and he comes on the scene as the director, the head of the Sword of the Lord. Curtis Hudson begins to really push Jack Hyles, and Jack Hyles becomes the quintessential leader of the IFB movement. So this is what we're going to do now. I want to go and begin to discuss the life of Jack Hyles. Okay? This is very important to really understand even today where the IFB movement is. Okay? So, Jack Hyles. Jack Hyles was born and raised in Italy, Texas, which is south of Dallas. When he was 18 years old, he enlisted in the Army and became part of the 82nd Airborne Division during World War II. He and his wife, Beverly, were married during the war. After the war, he completes his education at East Texas Baptist University, which was then East Texas Baptist College in Marshall, Texas. After he graduates from there, he begins to travel around and preach in Texas churches. And becomes popular in the Texas area. People like his preaching. And then he takes a church in Texas, the Miller Road Baptist Church in Garland, Texas. That's in Dallas County. And he pastors that church for 6 years. Now, while he's pastoring, when he takes the church has about 44 people. when he leaves the church 6 years later, he had grown it to 4,000 members. And it was during these days that Hyles left the Southern Baptist Convention. He led Miller Road Baptist Church out of the Southern Baptist Convention and became an independent Baptist. In 1959, Jack Hyles leaves Garland, Texas, and moves to Hammond, Indiana to take the First Baptist Church of Hammond. Now, here's something interesting. When he arrives, the church membership was about 700, and about a third of the members left the church after hearing his preaching. They didn't like his preaching style. So a third of the church leaves. So he gets there, 700. A third of the church leaves. So he goes down to 400? Then he begins the process of taking the First Baptist Church of Hammond out of the American Baptist Association. So then they become a independent Baptist church. So then during these years, Hyles takes the First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana, from a couple of hundred membership to more than 20,000. It was recorded in the 1990s that First Baptist was probably the largest church in the nation. In 1972, I mentioned this last time, in 1972, Jack Hyles and Russell Anderson founded and begins the Hyles-Anderson College. Hyles-Anderson College never sought accreditation, though, because Hyles insisted school accreditation would undermine his ability to control how the college ought to run. And there you have the fear that still seems to run in the camps of IFB colleges of accreditation. I remember when I was in college, this accreditation thing was still come up from time to time, and everybody thought, well, if you're accredited, the government can tell you what to do. Which is a very ignorant understanding of accreditation. So he's got the college. The church has grown by leaps and bounds. The college is growing. He's preaching at the Sword of the Lord conference. He's starting his own conference at his church called Pastor School, which brings in thousands of ministry people and pastors each year. And so he's really setting himself apart. In 1975, Time magazine described the phenomenon in an article titled Super Church. And it talked about his bus ministry and the phenomenon of the growing bus ministry. It notes the article in Time magazine notes the First Baptist Church of Hammond Sunday School, which regularly ran almost 14,000 people, pushed the church to a record attendance of 30,560 on March 16th, 1975. So you see just massive, massive growth within First Baptist Hammond and Jack Hyles' ministry. He wrote many books. I'm going to talk about his books a little bit later, but he wrote many books, and they sold quite a bit of copies. I remember when I was in Bible college, one of my Bible teachers who married Hyles' granddaughter used to say that his book, Hyles wrote a book called Blue Denim and Lace, and that book sold 1 million copies. If he only made $1 on it per book, which he didn't, he made more than that. That's $1 million he's brought in on one book alone. Okay, so he is not hurting for money as well during this time. So, let's see. Where am I at? All right. So he holds these pastor school conferences. Now, the interesting thing about the Hyles place is, at First Baptist Churches, Hammond, other than, for instance, the sword conferences Rice built the sword conferences on bringing guys across the country to come in and train pastors and ministry people. The pastor school, however, was basically just a conference for everybody to come to First Baptist to learn the First Baptist way of doing things. In fact, Jack Hyles actually wrote a book that is called the Hyles Church Manual, and that sold a lot of copies. And so many basically took that book And it was basically how Jack Hyles did ministry, and they copied ministry and doing their churches out of that book. And so you see his influence was far-reaching during these years. But Hyles' ministry is riddled with scandal. And in the early 80s, I'm going to talk about his family towards the end, but the early 80s, so Jack Hyles hires his son, Dave Hyles. Dave Hyles goes through college, all this stuff, becomes the youth pastor. So Dave Hyles becomes the youth pastor there at the church. And you should do some research on the Dave Hyles situation. Dave Hyles, in fact, there's a lawsuit going on with the church right now. The lawsuit is levied against Dave Hyles, Dave Hyles, First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana, and Hyles Anderson College, because Dave Hyles raped and several teenage girls while he was there as the church youth pastor. And so he was doing this, and it wasn't just one. Joy Evans Ryder, and it was a fantastic lady, is working this lawsuit right now. You should hear her testimony, how God has restored her life through that tragedy. But she's not the only one. There were many others that were during this time. I'm not talking about during Dave Hyles' life. I'm talking about just at First Baptist as a youth pastor, teenagers. And Dave Hyles did this to many girls, and it was Joy's story that really it was Joy's situation that really caused the rip. So Joy's done with it, and she decides that she talks to her parents, find out. She tells her dad, who is Wendell Evans, who was the president of the college, goes to Hyles. He follows her to a hotel. She informs Dave that it's over. She's not. Her dad is out in the parking lot watching, and then she gets out of there and leaves. You have to listen to the story. That guy was terrifying, but you need to listen to her story. So after that, Jack Hyles is confronted with this. So then, what do you do? You're supposed to call the police, right? Turn it in? No. What happens is that I don't care what they say. The way they try to cover this thing up. The fact of the matter is he was sent to another church by his dad. Jack Hyles had him resign. He left the church. He goes to Texas, goes to Miller Road Baptist Church in Garland, Texas, and becomes the pastor there. And that was how they handled that situation. And most people there at the church at the time knew what had happened. You just didn't talk about it. And so that was the Dave Hyles thing. There's a lot more about Dave Hyles' life, but as it goes with First Baptist Church at Hyles Anderson. Now, Dave actually comes back to First Baptist and is received back, and it's not long after that before he causes another embarrassment with his dad. But the first thing that I want to talk about when we get to the scandals is 1989. Okay, so 1989, Robert Sumner publishes a story called The Saddest Story We Ever Published. You can look this up, you can Google it, and you can go read it. It is lengthy, but you can Google it. It accused Hyles of sexual scandals, financial misappropriation, and doctrinal errors. These charges were denied by Hyles, who deemed them lies. He was accused of a decade-long affair with his secretary, Jenny Nishik, who happened to be the wife of a church deacon, Victor Nishik. Okay, so here's where it gets a little bit crazy. So in 1989, this story is published. Now, if you want to know who Jenny Nishik is, if you ever see, this is crazy, but if you ever see any clips of Jack Hyles preaching, you'll see him preaching. You'll see behind him people in the choir loft. Now, as you're viewing it, to the left of him, the first lady on the first row, right next to his view, is his wife, Beverly Hyles. On the other side, the lady is his secretary, Jenny Nishik. Okay? So that comes out in 1989, and that starts a ripple effect within the IFB movement. So this is 1989. Jack Hyles is the leader of the movement. He is, a major influence, and this story gets published. In fact, if you read, I'll try to link this book to the show notes. Jerry Kafitz wrote a book called The Profane Pulpit after Jack Scott went to prison. And he talks about how whenever this stuff started coming out, he was there at the church. They were instructed not to read this stuff. They were told at the church, do not read it. And if somebody catches you read it, they would turn you in and report you, and you would get in trouble. Interesting. So that happens in 1989. Then, in 1990, Victor Nishik releases his book called The Wizard of God, where he talks about his dealings and his story and his problems with Jack Hyles and how it ruined his marriage.
They slept apart, and so in my heart and mind, I have no doubt. Just to illustrate the point, in 1970, Jack Hyles took all the staff people on a cruise to the Caribbean, husbands and wives, and in those days, my wife and I and Beverly Hyles and Jack Hyles were inseparable socially, foursome. We always were together.
Uh-huh.
And on the cruise ship, Jenny, my wife, was assigned the job of tour director. And after the festivities and the dinners in the dining halls, Jack and Jenny would retire to plan next day's activities.
Uh-huh.
And I would not see my wife until the next morning. And I found out in subsequent years that Beverly Hyles also did not see her husband until the next morning while on the cruise. So somewhere in the bowels of a big cruise ship, those two managed to spend evenings and nights together.
And they.
So in 1985, I confronted him. We had a big, stormy 7-hour standoff.
How many hours?
7 hours.
7 hours in his office?
In his office.
With any red lights on the secretary's phone or not?
It was in the evening, so we started at 6:30, and we went almost till 1 o'clock in the morning, if not later. But it was just a lengthy standoff. And I basically demanded my wife back, and I basically demanded that the relationship cease. And, of course, he denied everything. And I told him that if he in any way damaged or caused my marriage to be dissolved, I still wanted my wife back. I still wanted to try to establish a relationship, however flawed it was. And I told him that if he didn't cooperate, I was going to go and talk to Beverly Hyles. And I did that. And that's when he basically made that notorious statement to me that if you want to have the same relationship with Beverly that I have with Jenny, you have my permission.
Same year. So The Wizard of God comes out. The same year, 1990, a guy named Voyle Glover, he was a lawyer, and he was a member of First Baptist Church, which I think was for about 20 years. He realizes what's going on, leaves the church. He ends up writing a book, a rather lengthy book. This is the longest one published. It's over 400 pages, called The Fundamental Seduction to Jack Hyles Case. And in that, he really lays out the case.
No, it's this aura that he projects of authority, this aura of confidence. Everybody likes somebody that comes off confident and sure of themselves, and Jack Hyles probably does it better than anybody I know. Yes, absolutely. He gets up there, and he is definitely in charge. And people like that. People need that sense of security that somebody's in charge.
Now, somewhere along the way, you had a falling out.
Well, I don't know that I would call it so much a falling out as a
education, correct?
An education, yeah, a realization that all was not right in La La Land, and that my pastor was not all he pretended to be. I learned subsequent to the writing of the book that In fact, some of the times of our greatest needs, we had a $90,000 surplus. But
at the right time, Pastor Hyles was saying we need money. Right?
Yeah. He's telling us we're broke, we don't have money. The principal who said he didn't know what was in the account, and he truly didn't, is without supplies.
Well, you paint an amazing picture of financial success with Pastor Hyles and his church. In fact, an astronomical picture, right?
Oh, clearly, this is a...
What kind of money are we talking about?
Well, that's one of the questions. What kind of money are we talking about? Nobody really knows the total income of the church, and that's one of the problems that exists over there, is you don't know how much is coming in, and you don't know how much is going out. I don't know the total income of the church. I know in the book I made some very educated calculations. He has a ministry. And this is only the book ministry. This has nothing to do with the tithes and the donations and the gifts. That's right. He took this book ministry and has admitted to these things in various forums, including his church recently. Took this book ministry and placed it under the umbrella of the church, but continued to control the funds. No deacon that I've talked to, former deacon or present deacon, knows the disbursements of that account, of those funds. Mm-hmm. Now, in looking at Hyles' statement, he made the following statements, published these statements. He said if he kept $1 for every book that he's put out or sold, he would have $12 million. So I assume that he sold 12 million books. Mm-hmm. I did a rough estimate.
I have the faithful feel an obligation to buy the books.
Oh, absolutely, sure. Yeah.
So I got a ready-made audience.
Sure. I've had people tell me they've bought every book he's ever published. I didn't. I bought many of them, but not every book.
So you have all of these things going on with Hyles, and the big story. So you have the Dave Hyles scandal, and just when he thinks that he's got that sort of calmed down, this stuff comes out about Hyles' affair with Jenny Nishik, his financial improprieties, the guy made tons of money. He owned the church, basically. He owned many buildings in Hammond. His daughter said, I'm going to play a clip towards the end of his daughter talking about it. And so you got this situation going on. Victor Nishik actually talks about this, where he says that his wife, they were having marriage issues because she had become so loyal as Hyles' secretary that and he believed that she fell in love with him. Hyles loved her, and they had this affair going on, and then they went in for marriage counseling, and Hyles told him to move to the basement. So he moved to the basement, and Hyles would go and have a relationship with his wife, till finally he broke out sort of and he says he was under mind control. This guy was God to them, and you didn't do what the pastors spoke for God. The pastor spoke as the oracles of God. Their pastor was Jack Hyles, so therefore Jack Hyles was the voice of God to them. And that was what was taught. And so, therefore, it took him a while for them to break out of this, and then he ended up leaving and writing this book. So you have these going on. Now, the next thing is not in 1991, the next scandal that happens with First Baptist Church and Hyles Anderson is the case of A.V. Ballinger. Now, A.V. Ballinger was a deacon. A.V. Ballinger was a deacon at First Baptist Church of Hammond, who then was arrested and went on trial for pedophilia.
In March, one of Hyles' deacons, A.V. Ballinger, was convicted on charges he molested a 7-year-old girl in Sunday school. A lawsuit by the girl's family charges Hyles told the parents that Deacon Ballinger just likes little girls.
If we can judge the world someday, we can judge within ourselves. A.V. Ballinger should not be judged in the courts of Hammond. He should be judged by wise people in First Baptist Church of Hammond, if he's judged at all.
So this deacon was sexually abusing a child in the Sunday school department and was caught. The sibling of the child that he was messing with, he was abusing, decided to speak out and was trying to get people to notice this. Then the family tried to say something. Then a Sunday school teacher that had walked by and seen something going on spoke out as well. So he's arrested. They go to trial. And here's an IFB name that you might be interested to hear. David Gibbs, the lawyer, is brought in to defend him. And David Gibbs represents A.V. Ballinger. Now, A.V. Ballinger is actually found guilty. After the testimonies, he is found guilty and becomes a registered sex offender, sentenced to prison. And after the trial is over, before his prison sentence starts, they decide, First Baptist Church of Hammond decides to throw a major celebration party for him. And they give him a check for $25,000. They have people lined up like crazy to honor him. And it's really, really disgusting and gross.
I want to show you something about First Baptist Church. I probably shouldn't say this, but I think it shows your greatness. Here's a man who's been accused of an awful crime. Here's a man that has been falsely accused, falsely tried, falsely convicted. We didn't ask him to resign the deacon board, nor will we. We didn't ask him to resign his Sunday school class or his job as an usher. He's kept on going. Or resign his job on the bus ministry. Didn't ask him to. I mean, I was the guy that led in that. I mean, I was the guy that said publicly, you heard me say it, if he goes, I go. So John, A.V., we're both going to have to go. But I said that. And here's the greatness of you folks. Last Wednesday night, we had deacon election to re-elect the deacons whose time was up and others. The leading vote getter for deacon last Wednesday night was A.V. Ballinger.
Remember them that are in bonds as bound with them, and them which suffer adversity, being yourselves also in the body. My Bible says that the adversity that this man is having to endure is to be entertained and borne and remembered by every single Christian. We also being in the body. What's happening to this man is happening to my faith. It's happening to my Savior. It's happening to my testimony. I am to remember. The word remember there doesn't just mean that I'm supposed to kind of mull it in my mind. It means I'm supposed to identify with. I'm here tonight to tell you that I'm committed to doing some things. And I want to encourage you to do some of these things. You listen to me. First of all, I believe the Bible commands us to identify clearly with those that for doing right are suffering adversity. I see across America Christians that grow shy. Christians that say, boy, I hope it all turns out, I'll pray for you, but they're nowhere to be found when the person's standing in the battle. Thank God this church is not like that at all. Thank God this is a church that steps up with pride and says, and it is an honor to be identified with Brother Ballinger.
So all of these scandals are going on. And then something happens. Now, this is another set of videos that you should go check out and look into on YouTube. But you have a news organization that decides that, well, they get word about this pastor who is arrested for pedophilia or rape. I can't remember which one right off the top of my head. Well, they begin to report on this issue, and then they start to do an investigation. And their investigation, their journalistic investigation, leads them to First Baptist Hammond. And then they begin to start investigating that. And so by the time it's all done, they produce this segment on the news channel that airs 6 days in a row called Praying, Preying, from the pulpit.
Eyewitness News has learned a group of fundamentalist churches around the country have a pattern of abusing children. The abuse includes severe discipline. In one case, there was sadistic torture, and in another, it may have involved murder. As we've told you in a series of special reports this week exclusively on Eyewitness News, TV2 investigator Vince Wade has learned the alleged child molestings at Washtenaw County's North Sharon Baptist Church appear to be part of this pattern of abuse. Vince joining us now with another of his special reports on Praying from the Pulpit. Vince?
Rich, the leadership of the North Sharon Baptist Church was educated at a Bible college in Schererville, Indiana, run by Jack Hyles, a hellfire and brimstone preacher well known in fundamentalist circles. Over the last few years, Hyles has been a source of scandal and controversy for fundamentalist believers. Hyles has one son, David, who had his own ministry until he was run out of 2 churches due to scandals involving wives in his congregations. As you will see, the son of the famous preacher man is a suspect in something far more.
And this news program during this time becomes huge. And it really shines a light on what's going on there. And it talks about other people that's left First Baptist Hammond. It talks about Hyles. They interview Vic Nishik. They get a chance to, they have Hyles on there. And, I mean, it really lays out everything. It talks about Dave Hyles. It talks about Dave Hyles' problem. So whenever he left First Baptist of Hammond, he goes to Garland, Texas. While he's in Garland, Texas, a janitor was coming out and found a briefcase that seemed wrong to be in the trash. So he pulled the briefcase, and the briefcase popped open, and there were nude pictures of women in the church. Found out the briefcase belonged to Pastor Dave Hyles. When everything came out, to find out Dave Hyles was having affairs with multiple women in the church. Over, I think, 14 or 15 women. At that time, he's married to Paula. Whenever this comes out, Paula knew about all the girls and teenage girls in First Baptist, but she stayed with him. After this comes out, Paula divorces him.
Did David's dad know that he was adulterous before we went to Texas? And the answer is definitely yes, and there's 100 people that know that, including himself. And why he lies about that, I'll never know. I went to him twice about things that I had heard about David, things that I had dealt. I had one of the girls beat me and David's sister up, telling us that she was sleeping with him, and we told his dad. Another occasion was a girl that was working at the cemetery, and the guy that runs the cemetery knows this. I don't know if he ever went to Hyles about it. I assumed he did. I'm not sure. He made David go to him first, so he may have hung that over David's head as a threat by saying he'd go to his dad. I don't know. But I told his dad about that. So I don't know. I think the only immorality was going on was between him and the girls he was seeing, and there were a lot of them. He wised up though after we went to Garland. He didn't have affairs with single girls anymore. There was one divorced woman he was sleeping with, but he found out that sleeping with teenagers, they talk. They like to talk, but if he kept it with the women, the married women, they had as much to lose as he did, so they weren't as willing to talk, and they didn't. In fact, we had somewhat of a war going on with this. All these women in our church thought they were the one and only. And when it came out that there were 14 or 15 of them, we about had a war going on there.
And then he ends up marrying one of the ladies he had an affair with in Garland, Texas, Brenda. And I believe her name was Brenda. And then they get married. Well, he leaves Texas. He goes back to First Baptist of Hammond. While he's at First Baptist of Hammond, the guy still can't stay out of it. And so he ends up, somebody finds out that there's this sex magazine that has nude pictures of people that are soliciting other couples to have swinger parties with them. And somebody sees that from the church, and they find out, hey, that's Dave's wife. And so then people find out that that's Dave's wife. So when pastor school happened, actually what happens is people take these things and they start handing them out to pastors as they're coming in for pastor school. And of course, Jack Hyles couldn't ignore it then, and so he had to send him off one more time. But also, Dave Hyles ran into some other legal trouble whenever his stepson, who was only, I think, 18 months old, died in their home, and the subsequent cause they couldn't determine because they wouldn't allow him to do an autopsy, and they had the funeral really quick. But investigators and journalistic investigators believe that the cause was physical abuse.
All of our guests tonight, tell me something. David Hyles set out to follow in his father's footsteps, but his zest for women cost him his pulpit and his first marriage. When David left a Texas church in disgrace, he and his girlfriend, Brenda Stevens, moved to Bolingbrook, Illinois, with her 2 children by her first marriage. It wasn't long before her youngest son, 17-month-old Brent Stevens, came to the attention of abuse investigators. In 1985, they found him with a broken leg plus 8 or 9 bones in various stages of healing. Paul Cialino was a homicide investigator for the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. He and his team fought, unsuccessfully, to keep Brent away from David and Brenda.
I wasn't concerned this child was going to be abused again. I was concerned this kid was going to wind up dead. That was my concern.
His concern was justified. A few months later, Brent Stevens was found dead in his crib. Due to bureaucratic bungling, an inconclusive autopsy was done at a hospital instead of the morgue. But at the inquest, David Hyles invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Brenda, the mother of the dead child, was a no-show. As for the status of the investigation...
This case is an open case still today. And nothing's been done.
Can anything be done with this?
Absolutely. It's a murder case. I would even go further and say that if I could get David and Brenda in a court of law, they'd both get convicted of murder. Without a doubt. I have a dead child with a history of abuse, and I have 2 people who were the only people access to that child that night. And I would almost bet that 12 of their peers would convict them on almost dead evidence alone.
And so that's all of that. All of this stuff comes out in that program of Praying for the Pulpit. So after this is over, there's so much heat, and people, there is a reaction. By this time, there is a reaction within the IFB. And so people start, so you're talking about early 90s here. Within the IFB, people start distancing themselves from Hyles. Unless you're from Hyles, unless you graduated from First Baptist of Hammond, but around the other sections, you start to see a distancing from Jack Hyles. So they have a press conference. And you can go watch this on YouTube as well. They have a press conference. Really deal with anything that is in the program or give explanations for it. It was really just a press conference to attack the media instead of explain these stories.
We have been viciously and maliciously misrepresented. They have attacked us at our strongest point, and that is our belief in purity, our love for children, and our compassion. They are saying that there is a network of churches with child molestation scandals that have a tie with Hyles Anderson College and First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana. I do not mean to be mean. I do mean to be mad. Never a lie was spawned by Lucifer out of hell any greater than to cast reflection upon the purity and motives that are holy of our bus ministries.
Okay. The last major issue during Hyles' life is in October 1997. An attorney named Vernon Petria files a lawsuit against First Baptist Church of Hammond. Now, this lawsuit was accusing the church and the pastor of allowing a mentally retarded woman to be sexually assaulted for 6 years. Now, it wasn't saying Hyles did it or anything like that, but it's saying the lawsuit was saying they knew about it, or leadership in the church knew about it and covered it up and allowed it to go on for 6 years. The woman was induced by agents of the church in 91 to ride a bus to attend Sunday school at First Baptist. She was in the care of the church when she was sexually assaulted, molested, battered, and raped more than once until 1996. Hyles was sued because he and his church failed to do their duty to protect her, the lawyer said. The pattern of assault can be traced to a Sunday in 1991 when a First Baptist teacher saw someone abusing the woman and reported it to church leaders and police, but the parents were never told, and she kept going to church, where she was threatened into silence. The sexual abuse ended when the woman developed a horrible infection and was taken to a doctor to find out what was wrong. When the doctor couldn't understand where the infection was coming from, she was admitted to a hospital where they found embedded in her a plastic object. The woman then told what had happened to her, recalling that a church program instructor led her to a room and served as a lookout while 2 or 3 males raped her. Now, Hyles denied all of these things, said that if he had known about it, it wouldn't have happened. But the only problem with this, now whether he knew about it or not, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is there is a pattern of covering these things up that exists there. And so for that reason, that casts serious doubt on whether if he did know or not. It's hard, you can't believe him. So what ends up happening in the 1997 lawsuit is they end up settling the lawsuit for an undisclosed amount of money. So that is the scandals. Now, Hyles ends up dying in 2001, and when he dies in 2001, the church, he was grooming the next guy to come. The next guy that became the pastor of First Baptist Church of Hammond was his son-in-law, Jack Scott. Jack Scott married his daughter Cindy, and many that were there during the Hyles years and remember this have told me that Hyles groomed Scott for years because everybody sort of had an idea Scott was going to end up taking over, and seemed like the man for the job. And so when Jack Hyles died in 2001, I believe it was only a few months later, and Jack Scott became the pastor of First Baptist Church of Hammond. So that is Jack Hyles. Now, he dies in 2001. He did stay pastor of First Baptist Church for quite a long time. But let's look at some of his preaching and some of the books that he wrote. Now, okay, so Hyles wrote quite a bit of books. He wrote approximately 50 works in his lifetime, over 14 million total copies in circulation, including his popular Is There a Hell?, which was based on a sermon that he preached at the Sword of the Lord conference. He had another work, Enemies of Soul Winning, and the Blue Denim and Lace book. I have a book here that I'm going to examine some of his teachings that I think are really awful on teaching, on preaching. He had a book, in the book Enemies on Soul Winning, Hyles taught that one could not be born again unless the King James Version was used somewhere along the line in that person's life. Wow, okay. He wrote quite a bit of books. He wrote, and most of the, let me say this. When you talk about Hyles' influence and his bad doctrine, the abuse of theology, the problems with his teaching, people will say, well, that's just First Baptist Hammond. That's just Hyles. But here's the problem. Through pastor school, the students coming out of Hyles Anderson College and his books, okay, all of these problem areas of his teaching was spread. And so a lot of the issues that you have come from a lot of these things. And so this philosophy was spread like crazy throughout the IFB world. I think a lot of the problems with the cover-ups and abuse had to do with a book that he wrote on justice. And then there's also, here's some bad preaching he did. You think about the ideas of how you just cover up things and allow the preacher or the man of God to keep on serving. And that a lot of times, a lot of that has to do to a message that he preached on how to increase God's patience.
Tonight, I'm going to speak on the subject, how to increase God's patience. And was used again. Many folks in the Bible committed adultery and were never used again. Now, some people in the Bible committed sins that caused them to forfeit ever being used of God again. And others in the Bible committed those same sins and were used of God again. And what was the difference of the people who were used of God after committing a certain sin and the people who were not used of God after committing the same sin? I'm going to tell you. In the life of Samson. Samson always loved God and wanted to do right, and he always gave all he had. I'm saying, listen, Samson was valuable to God. Now hear me carefully. Samson was so dedicated to God that when he made some stupid mistake, God said, I need the fella too much to put him on the shelf. He's doing too much good for one little bad thing to cause him to forfeit his chance to serve me. Now I want to say a few words. I want to give you three statements here, and I want you to follow me very carefully. Statement number one, and if you listen to the statement, you listen to these three statements, see where's it coming for. Number one, God's degree of patience with you when you stumble is determined by how fast you were running. I said God's degree of patience with you when you stumble is determined by how fast you were running. Statement number two. Your chance at a second chance will depend on what you did with your first chance. Why did God give David a second chance? Because David did a heap with his first chance.
Some of the other really bad, blasphemous things that he's taught. There's a message that he talked about a helpless God.
What I'm trying to say is this: God is handcuffed and God is paralyzed because man knows not God's language. And so God tonight comes and says, just as you need my mighty power to do my work, I need your power to do my work also.
He preaches in one message, says that Jesus did not pay it all.
I want to speak tonight on the subject, Jesus did not pay it all. I'll ask you not to worry about turning to it again, but I want to just read a line or two for you. Who now rejoice in my suffering for you. Now that's talking about Calvary. And fill up that which is behind or lacking of the afflictions or suffering of Christ in my flesh for his body's sake. Did you hear that? Paul said there's something lacking in the penalty Jesus paid. Now I said it's my job to make up that. It's my job to finish out the atonement. It's my job to finish out the vicarious death of Christ. Let me read the verse we didn't read a while ago and add to it one that we did, and listen carefully to this one. For we which live are always delivered unto death for Jesus' sake, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our mortal flesh. Get this. So then death worketh in us, but life in you. Paul is saying, not only did Jesus die a vicarious death for you, but Paul is saying to the church at Corinth and the church at Colossae that he also vicariously died for them. The title of my sermon is Jesus Did Not Pay It All. We sing, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow.
I'm speaking tonight on the subject, Jesus did not pay at all.
And then there's one, according to, and the theology, my theology really is just frustrated by this one that he preached called, "Why Don't You Forgive God?"
But this morning, I'm going to change the message. And I've got a sneaking suspicion I'm going to preach a truth that has never been voiced exactly like this in the 100 years of our church's history. I'm going to speak this morning on the subject, why don't you forgive God? Why don't you forgive God? You say, preacher, you mean, why doesn't God forgive me? No. No, I'm speaking on the subject, why don't you forgive God? But you say, Brother Hyles, God has never done anything wrong. You're exactly right. We have a wonderful God. He's never done anything wrong. But most people think He has. And since most people think He has, I'm asking you to forgive Him.
So Jack Hyles was not somebody that had his theology straight. He did not preach expositionally. He actually ridiculed expositional preaching. I think that he preached over 50 years, and there's sermon libraries online that have tons. I mean, most of his preaching, you're talking thousands of sermons. And all of his sermons, you cannot find one time where Jack Hyles preached through a book of the Bible. His theology was terrible. His moral character was terrible. It was a cult atmosphere there at his church. Let's talk about his family. So he had 4 kids. He had David, which we talked about, who David to this day still has not apologized for the abuse that he has. He has still not owned up to it, and he has still not repented of it. But yet now he started a ministry, Fallen in Grace Ministries, where he tries to, reach out to pastors that have messed up in the ministry. And I'm like, listen, guy, you need to get right with God. And so that's his son. Now, also, you have his daughter, Cindy. Cindy marries Jack Scott. They become the next royal couple there at First Baptist Church of Hammond. And when Jack Scott falls in 2012, he's now in prison. And while he's in prison, they divorce. So Cindy divorces her husband. They have another daughter named Becky, and they have a daughter named Linda. Now, this is Linda's testimony about her dad and her family in that church.
Well, I grew up outside of Chicago, and my dad pastored actually a wonderful church there that through the years evolved into a 50,000 member cult. It operated and still operates under the guise of an independent fundamental Baptist church. But those who have left, the followers who have tried to leave, the outsiders, even the media, who was on 2020 last year, recognize that it's clearly a cult. Every member was in complete obedience to my father. They didn't dare disagree or be disloyal for fear of being publicly ridiculed or punished or banished for doing so. They didn't go on a vacation without asking my dad's permission. And if he had said to drink the Kool-Aid, I'm not kidding, they would have. My dad lived a double life, one of righteous family man and dynamic speaker in the public eye, but one of sordid sexual secrets privately. Secrets that only my siblings and me and my mom knew. He hated my mom, hated her, treated her terribly, abused her, and even turned his own children against our mother. We hated her. He told us she was crazy. we thought to make him happy, we'd hate her too. Our home was full of turmoil, hatred, stress, strife. And as a little girl, it was isolating, it was intense, and it was frightening. He had affairs. He had a mistress for many years, the wife of a Sunday school teacher, built her family a beautiful home right around the corner from our house. You could see their family from our back door. It was craziness, living one way, preaching another.
Now, here is my problem with First Baptist Church of Hammond today. Okay? That is the legacy and influence of Jack Hyles. When you examine his life, you examine biblically what he taught. You examine biblically what he preached. You examine his morality. You examine the way he handled finances. Maybe that'll be something that we cover one time. Sometime is proper use financially of a pastor's money. You examine the fruit of his family. Okay? Is this somebody that we should look back to and honor? Is this somebody that is worthy of lifting up? I have serious reservations about lifting up any man. But him? I just don't find anything positive to say about the guy, and this is where it ends up being, and here's the problem. And you find the same thing with J. Frank Norris. But look at how many people came to Christ. So that's what it is. It all comes down to the results, the amount of numbers, the amount of people that come through that church. And that becomes the preeminent thing. That becomes the most important thing. And I think that is extremely unbiblical. I think that is antithetical to the Bible, to scriptural teaching, and I think it needs to be reexamined. Now, here's my problem, as I started this off by saying this is my problem with the current state of First Baptist Church of Hammond. Now, since Scott left, John Wilkerson became the new pastor, and many people say things have changed there. Prove to me that things have changed by taking down Hyles' statue. Prove to me that things have changed by stop lifting up Jack Hyles. Okay? This guy is not someone that in any shape or fashion needs to be looked at or regarded in the church. Okay? So this Jack Hyles memorial that they got set up there, that gives me serious reservations, because if you are honoring or regarding or lifting up somebody who, quite honestly, didn't exhibit anything Christ-like, was extremely disqualified in ministry, and you don't see that, or you see that and won't do anything about it, that gives me serious reservations about you. Jack Hyles' legacy still lives on. His influence and legacy still lives on. I mean, it was just, you were listening to IFB preacher clips, and a couple of months ago, you have Jeff Fugit in Kentucky honoring John Hamblin by giving them Jack Hyles' ordination certificate, like it's some type of piece of historical artifact that is worth millions. I mean, the idol worship of Jack Hyles is still present with the IFB today. His influence is still there, and it really deserves taking an examination within the IFB of who this guy really is. So, Jack Hyles is not somebody that is a worthwhile character, a worthwhile preacher, pastor, figure, personality in the independent fundamental Baptist movement for them to rest their hats on. And so I'm going to stop right there. Next time, my goal is to sort of talk about what else was going on within the IFB movement during that time and bring it up to sort of the current landscape of the IFB movement and wrap up the history section of the IFB in the series that we've been doing in the history of the IFB. So thanks you guys so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the podcast, give it a share on social media. And you can find or follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm working on getting a YouTube page going, working on that, and also I have plans to spread it across podcast platforms. But I appreciate the response thus far, and until next time, guys, to God, not the pastor, be the glory.